Hi, go on. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video, I'm going to cover the topic of what would have been different if Saruman had not turned evil. In this video, specifically in response to a new patron, so I'm going to give him a shout out. It's PABrewNews. I assume it has something to do with beer in Pennsylvania, but I have no idea. But anyway, thank you very much for the patronage, and here is your video request. Now, I'll also say Yoyston, or Men of the West, the other YouTube channel, one of the other YouTube channels that covers Tolkien stuff, has already done a video on this topic. I specifically avoided watching that prior to doing this, so any conclusions that I reach similar to his are pure coincidence. So anyway, let's talk about what happens if Saruman never turned to the evil side. So Saruman's history makes the entire War of the Ring a little bit tricky in terms of figuring out the consequences for which side he's on, because his machinations go way back. And the two main things that I can think of as far as early effects on the events that we know of from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings would be he probably would not have delayed attacking the necromancer at Dol Guldur in the sequence of timing, which in the history as we know it, it happens at the same time as the events of The Hobbit. The second thing would be he would not have told the council that the ring had rolled down the river into the sea, because obviously he made that up to, throw them all off the scent, because both of these really are aimed at himself finding the ring so that he can take it. The reason he delays attacking the necromancer or Sauron at Dol Guldur is because he's hoping that with Sauron there, relatively near the Gladden Fields where the ring was lost, he can actually get the ring to manifest itself or come to light in some way that Saruman himself would be able to take advantage of and claim for his own. And so he's simultaneously throwing the rest of the White Council off the scent by saying, oh, it's out of reach, we're never going to find it, but also hoping that their inactivity will lead to the ring coming to light so that he can claim it. So his activity as far as his, doing things out of evil desires goes way back. And this could have really tremendous effects on everything that happens later on. So if we assume, for example, that the White Council would have attacked Dol Guldur earlier, all of those events would have occurred before anything relating to Smaug, would have happened, other than Smaug actually taking Erebor in the first place. So Gandalf would not have had an excuse to leave the company of the dwarves and Bilbo to go off and do his stuff with the White Council, and so he wouldn't have left them at Mirkwood. And so the very history of the Hobbit might have been different. That might have led to, them not getting captured by the elves, making it through Mirkwood with Gandalf's help. Who knows exactly how that would have turned out. But where that affects how the story of the ring goes gets a little more interesting and a little bit tricky. So the main thing here is if Gandalf already knows that the ring might still be found somewhere because Saruman hasn't assured the White Council, hey, it's gone, it's in the sea somewhere, then the first time he finds out about Bilbo having a ring, he might already have his antenna up thinking, this might be the one and we might need to do something about it. So I don't think it's 100% clear exactly when Gandalf finds out what the ring is, when Bilbo had a ring, but it's almost certainly before the end of the events in The Hobbit. Now, if he finds out while they're all still in Dale and Erebor after the Battle of the Five Armies and all that, then he might already be making plans at that point to tell Bilbo, hey, this ring might be of like world, ending importance. We might need to do something about it. And he might be making plans to, maybe as Bilbo is going back to his own home in the Shire, making plans to like look, I'm going to leave you with Beorn, or I'm going to leave you in Rivendell, and I'm going to hike off and go find Saruman and ask him, like, how do we find out for sure if this is the One Ring, and what do we do about it if so? And you have to remember here, in the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf actually tells Frodo, I could have consulted Saruman about this ring, but something always held me back. Now, obviously, in retrospect, that something is, either providence or his own intuition kicking in and telling him, Saruman's not really on your side anymore. So that would not be the case, and therefore he would have no reason not to consult Saruman in this particular instance. So, whenever he finds out about Bilbo's ring, he's going to find out as much as he can, as quickly as he can, and the best way for him to do that would be to just go straight to Saruman. And he would have already told Bilbo, hey, that ring you got, you might have to give it up, because it might be this really important ring that's been missing for a long time that might lead to the rise of the Dark Lord from an age ago, and just get ready in case it is. So who knows how that would have played out specifically in the sequence of timing, but one way or another, it means that the quest to destroy the ring would have started before Frodo was even born. Like, all the events that we get in the Lord of the Rings, totally not going to happen. Boromir's not alive. Faramir's not alive. Denethor's not steward. His father, Ecthelion, is the steward. I think. It might even be the steward before Ecthelion, actually. Aragorn is just a kid. At the time of The Hobbit, Aragorn is 10 years old. So you've got all these events and people that are going to change drastically. Legolas is still around, of course, because Legolas is, several thousand years old at this point, and, he's been around a long time. Even though we don't meet him in The Hobbit as written, he was there, or, would have been there. So how this would play out, I would imagine it would end up being something like, Gandalf finding out about Bilbo's ring, he goes and tells Saruman about it, and Saruman's like, okay, well, the scroll I read said this about the ring, so put it in a fire, see if it has some writing on it. And then if it does, here's what we need to do. So Gandalf hurries back to Bilbo and says, let me make a test with this ring real quick. Bam. And he, probably plays it kind of like Frodo does, like he does with Frodo, and basically says, can I see that thing for a second? I want to see if there's any writing on it. And Bilbo's like, well, I don't see any but here. And he's like, just throws it in and doesn't tell Bilbo ahead of time. And then Bilbo, of course, probably panics just like Frodo does. And Bilbo, panicking like that, Gandalf would probably respond the same way. Are you so attached to it already? But then he pulls it out, of course, finds out that it does have the writing. He's like, yep, sure enough, this is what I was afraid it was. Bilbo, I'm afraid you're going to have to lose your souvenir. So he's going to have to manage all this. And so the next question is, what do you do from there? Now, the good news is Sauron has only just recently been kicked out of Dol Guldur. He's already having to, well, I say recently. It's not clear when he would have been kicked out of Dol Guldur if Saruman had been not trying to hold that off. I think it probably would tell in the tale of years, but anyway, it's happened. So Gandalf is going to be like, okay, Sauron is, trying to rebuild his forces somewhere, but he's not really back to full strength yet. And this is another important factor about Saruman not telling, trying to make them not do it. In the Lord of the Rings, what we find out is that while Sauron kind of retreated from Dol Guldur when the White Council forced him out, it was kind of just a feigned retreat. He was kind of already ready to go set back up in Mordor. And if they had done that much earlier, Sauron would not have been as ready as he ended up being, and therefore might have taken a little bit longer to rebuild his strength in Mordor. And also, all the free peoples would have had more time, more advance warning. Hey, the Dark Lord is back. We've got to get ready for this. Gondor would have been more prepared. Rohan would have been probably more prepared. And so it would have been a lot harder for Sauron to do, a whole lot of what ends up happening in the Lord of the Rings. For example, Sauron, causes the battle at the Bridge of Osgiliath that Boromir tells the council about in order to get the Nazgul safe passage over the river Anduin so they can go look for the ring. That might not be so easy to pull off if Sauron is taking longer and longer to build up and they had more and more time to prepare in advance. So that may give, Bilbo and Gandalf way more lead time in order to get ready to figure out what they want to do. So Gandalf could be like, okay, here's the plan. Sauron isn't really capable of doing anything about it just yet. We're going to go to Rivendell, meet up with Elrond, and from there we're going to go, wherever we need to go from there. So they take off and go to Rivendell. Gandalf doesn't have to leave Bilbo like he leaves Frodo to go figure out what's going on. In The Lord of the Rings is written, of course, he leaves because he has this bad feeling and he's like, something's wrong and I need to get news. And then he runs into Radagast, and Radagast basically tells him, you got to go see Saruman because he says it's really urgent, you got to go now. So he doesn't leave a letter with Barliman. He's with Bilbo all the time. He stays with him. They go to Rivendell. Now, the interesting thing here is you're not going to have this council of people who just randomly all show up at the same time. Aragorn is still a kid, but you're going to have Elrond and you're going to have Glorfindel and other members of Elrond's household, and they're going to be like, okay, here's the plan. We've got to destroy the ring, which means we got to go to Mordor. So I'm going to send some people with you, to help you out. You and, Gandalf and Bilbo, we're going to help you out with a few of our elves. And that might be Glorfindel. It might be somebody else. Who knows? But they all set out. And here again, because the Misty Mountains would have been just recently cleared out by the events of The Hobbit, because like all the goblins in the north had pretty much gone to the Battle of Five Armies, they could have either taken a pass through the Misty Mountains because they would have been safe at the time, or they might have gone just straight south and met up with Saruman because he's like the ring expert and he's also been studying Sauron and ways to defeat him over the years. So they could have taken either of those two routes, and I would suspect probably they would have taken the southernmost route. And that means they would have met up with Saruman. He might have even ended up going with them for the completion of the journey. And it wouldn't have been as dangerous to go through Minas Tirith because you don't have Denethor running the show. You've got Ecthelion, or maybe his father. I can't remember exactly the timing. So you wouldn't have the danger of having Denethor, who's a little bit power grabby about it, trying to, maybe interfere in ways that he shouldn't. So, you get Saruman, and then you can go through Minas Tirith and then go into Mordor. Now, what going into Mordor looks like, with, not Gollum leading Frodo and Sam through the Cirith Ungol and whatnot, tricky question. It's never really clear what Gandalf's plan is to get into Mordor in The Lord of the Rings, but it doesn't seem to be going, through Cirith Ungol. So whatever the plan is, who knows, but one way or another, they plan to get into Mordor. But the job is probably going to be a whole lot easier because Sauron is like way behind in terms of, building up his armies, and all the free peoples are way ahead in terms of countering whatever Sauron is doing. And they've got Saruman's help, not his hindrance, in building up an army of Uruk-hai attacking the Rohirrim. So you might even get a situation in which you have something like the battle at the Black Gate, where Gandalf and Saruman and, Galadriel and Elrond are probably pitching in too because they're part of the council, and they're probably telling all of their friends and whatnot, hey, look, we've got our last-ditch effort here. We're going to try to really destroy the ring for real, which Isildur didn't do when he should have. And so what we need to do is we need to get all of our people together, and we need to attack Sauron, distract him while we get, this plan going. So you might have something similar to the Black Gate, but it wouldn't be quite as hopeless of a die roll. But one way or the other, eventually, sooner or later, they get into Mordor with whoever's with Bilbo, and then things play out. Now, interestingly, of course, with Bilbo going to Mount Doom and no Gollum being involved, would Gollum have to be involved somehow? Because the whole point kind of at the end of The Lord of the Rings is that Gollum is pretty much necessary to the completion of the quest, because no one is really capable of getting to Mount Doom and then not keeping the ring. I mean, it's just, the ring is too powerful for that. So maybe we have to imagine that Gollum again somehow finds out where they are, what's going on, and finds them maybe while he himself is trying to sneak into Mordor, because he's drawn there after he leaves the Misty Mountains. So maybe he follows along and tries to take it from Bilbo when they go into the mountain, and that's how it ends. Who knows? But I think it would play out something like that. Now, alternatively, we could imagine that the events of The Hobbit don't really change much, and let's say Saruman's being good doesn't affect much until, Third Age 3018, when Frodo actually does set out with the ring. Let's take a look at that briefly. So, if Frodo still ends up with the ring, and we still get the main story of the Lord of the Rings, but with the only difference being Saruman is not evil, then you can get a lot of changes still, just very subtle. So Frodo still goes to, Rivendell with the Black Riders hot on his heels, and you do have Aragorn, Boromir's around, all that kind of stuff. So Frodo could still set out from Rivendell with the same companions that he does, but then in moving south, when Boromir suggests using the Gap of Rohan instead of, trying to climb the Pass of Caradhras, probably nobody even mentions the Pass of Caradhras, because if Saruman is, still on the good guy's side, then, you've got a obvious choice. It's like it's perfectly safe to go south. Why would we need to risk climbing a snow-covered mountain or going through Moria? So you don't get Gandalf getting killed by the Balrog, but you do get Gandalf going, with the company down to Saruman's place at Isengard, and then Saruman probably in some way helps out the company, which means Boromir doesn't die either. So then you do have orcs coming from Mordor trying to, scout out places and find things and whatnot, because you do have in the Lord of the Rings the Uruk-hai that ambush the company, at the Falls of Rauros. They end up getting mixed in with some Misty Mountains orcs and some Mordor orcs that are all kind of jumbled up at the same place at the same time, kind of by chance. But then those Mordor orcs, what are they doing with no Uruk-hai around to kind of mess with what they do? They're probably just hunting around, the eastern and western banks of the Anduin, and they probably never find the company because they're too far, they're over the mountains basically. They might end up encroaching into Rohan, which means the Rohirrim are fighting them off instead of fighting off Saruman's Uruk-hai. And then the company, they come through Isengard, get some help from Saruman in whatever form that might be, and then they're probably, this is where it also gets a little bit tricky, because it's like, what do you do about Minas Tirith in this scenario? Gandalf knows Denethor well enough to know he can't be trusted, and therefore he's going to want to avoid it. Aragorn and Boromir both want to go to Minas Tirith to fight in the wars, because Aragorn is going to fulfill his destiny, and Boromir, of course, belongs there. It's what he does. So at that point, you'd probably see a splintering of the Fellowship, with at least Aragorn and Boromir going to Minas Tirith. And in fact, in the Lord of the Rings itself, when you start seeing people take a vote when Frodo is off thinking by himself, Legolas and Gimli also express interest in going to Minas Tirith rather than going the eastern road to Mordor direct. So you might see Legolas and Gimli also, with Aragorn and Boromir, splinter off from the main group, going to Minas Tirith, fighting in the war, doing whatever they're going to do in that scenario. Does Aragorn end up with the Paths of the Dead in that case? It doesn't really seem like he would, because why would he need to? He's not going to be, like pressed for time, running from the battle of, all the Uruk-hai and Helm's Deep, trying to get to Minas Tirith in a hurry to fend off the Corsairs. Then again, he might, depending on how things go. Saruman might have intelligence from the Palantir, which seems unlikely, because that's exactly why Saruman goes bad. So maybe he would have been wise enough in the scenario not to use it. But, there might be news one way or another of, the Corsairs are raiding the coast, and that's one of Sauron's main, forces that he's going to be using to attack Gondor. So Aragorn has to go, okay, how am I going to get to Minas Tirith? How am I going to handle this situation? So he might still take that route, but it seems a lot less likely. Meanwhile, the rest of the group, mainly Gandalf and the hobbits, and maybe Saruman joins up with them, who knows, they continue on to the main quest. Now here we don't get Gollum, because Gollum in the Lord of the Rings is in the mines of Moria, and he gets trapped at the western end because he doesn't realize that he can just push the door open, or if he tried it, he was too weak to do it. So he doesn't even meet up with the Fellowship in this scenario, and probably starves to death in Moria, frankly. So there's no Gollum involved in this, and the rest of the company is not going to have his help getting into Mordor. So again, whatever Gandalf's plan for getting into Mordor was, that's what we're going to end up seeing. We just don't really know what that was. So eventually, though, one way or the other, you're going to try to sneak into Mordor, and then the question is, how does the ring get destroyed in that scenario? It's like, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And this is why it's really hard to mess with the story as written, because so much of it is kind of contingent on everything else. That, the ring only gets destroyed if Gollum is there. Does that still follow in this scenario? I mean, on the bright side, Frodo probably doesn't end up with a wound from Shelob, probably doesn't end up with getting captured by the orcs in Cirith Ungol, so he's not necessarily as susceptible. So does he manage to pull it off? That's actually kind of hard to say, but I think that's how the story would go a little bit differently if Saruman had not turned evil. And that's kind of as far as I want to go, because speculating to more detail beyond that, that gets really, really hazy really fast. So that's my kind of two theories on how things would have been different if Saruman had remained good. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and again, shout out to PABrewNews for, his patronage and suggesting this video topic. So good job there. Now I'm going to go watch Yoiston's video and see if we came up with some of the same ideas. But anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, please give it a like, share it around, and you can follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore for some occasional Tolkien-related trivia questions. I'm also on Rumble, and you can support me over at Patreon. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie.